7 people died because of a fire hose, held by painters who were just trying to knock the dust off an airplane. 3 days later, that airplane fell into the Mediterranean Sea with both engines at full power and 2 pilots who were not, in any way, flying badly. That's the part nobody discusses. Everybody assumes the crew fumbled it. They didn't. They were deliberately testing a safety system while the flight computers had quietly stopped believing in it. And this jet was built with 3 separate sensors for exactly that reason, so that one liar could never fool it. On the afternoon of November 27th, 2008, the computers listened to the 2 broken sensors and threw away the only honest one. How does that even happen? Stay with this, because the answer is a chain of small, boring decisions, and every single link was avoidable. Start with the airplane itself. An Airbus A320-32, registration D-AXLA, owned by Air New Zealand, leased out and flown by XL Airways Germany. On November 3rd, 2008, it landed at Perpignan-Rivesaltes Airport in southern France for what amounts to a handover inspection. The lease was ending. The jet was going home to New Zealand, so it needed checks, paperwork, and a fresh coat of paint in the owner's colors. Routine. The least dramatic thing in aviation. Nobody at Perpignan was doing anything reckless or exotic. They were prepping an aircraft for delivery, the way hundreds of aircraft get prepped every year. But the schedule was tight. The airframe was dusty from the paintwork, and somebody needed to rinse it clean before the next stage. That's where the story turns, and it turns in the most ordinary way possible. November 24th. 3 days before anyone dies. The maintenance painters grabbed a high-pressure fire hose and washed the aircraft down for 15 to 20 minutes. Water, mixed with chemical cleaning agents, blasted across every surface of that fuselage. And on the nose of an Airbus, low down, near the front, sit small metal vanes that stick out into the airflow. Those are the angle of attack sensors. The manual is explicit about protecting them. Nobody covered them, not one. So pressurized water and cleaning chemicals went straight into the sensor bodies and sat there in the dark, invisible, weighing nothing, showing up on no checklist and no inspection sheet. The plane looked immaculate. The paint was beautiful. And inside 3 small probes on its nose, there was standing water. What does an angle of attack sensor actually do? Forget the jargon. It's a little vane that measures the angle between the wing and the oncoming air. Small angle, the wing slices through cleanly. Too big an angle, the air stops flowing smoothly over the wing and the wing quits producing lift. That's a stall. That's the thing that drops airplanes out of the sky. Which means those 3 cheap little vanes are not accessories. They are how a modern jet knows whether it's about to stop flying. Every stall warning, every automatic protection, every "the computer will save you" promise in that cockpit traces back to those probes, 3 of them, for redundancy. Because engineers assumed a sensor could break. They just assumed it would break alone. If that already makes your stomach turn, subscribe to this channel, because the details that get left out of aviation stories are almost always the ones that matter most. November 27th, 2008, 14:44 UTC. Flight 888T lifts off from Perpignan. Not a passenger service. Nobody bought a ticket. This was an acceptance test flight, the checkout run before handing the jet back to its owner, and there were 7 people on board, 2 XL Airways pilots, German aviation officials, and Air New Zealand representatives who'd flown across the world to receive their aircraft. Test flights are supposed to be tightly scripted. Every maneuver briefed, every altitude planned, every safety margin written down before the wheels leave the ground. That's the whole point of them. So the climb begins, the checks begin, and the airplane behaves normally, because at low altitude, the water in those probes is still liquid and the vanes still move. For about 20 minutes, everything works. Then the jet keeps climbing. 39,000 feet. Up there, the outside air runs brutally cold, and between 1504 and 1506 UTC, the water sitting inside sensors 1 and 2 turned to ice. Frozen solid. The vanes stopped moving. They locked at the angle they happened to be sitting at in cruise, 4.2 degrees on the first, 3.8 degrees on the second. 2 probes jammed within a whisker of each other, reading a perfectly plausible cruise number. And sensor 3? Still fine, still free, still telling the truth. Nothing on the flight deck lit up. No chime, no caution, no message. Because as far as the aircraft was concerned, 2 of its 3 sources agreed beautifully and everything was calm. The trap was now built, loaded, and completely invisible. And the crew flew on for another 40 minutes with no idea they were carrying it. Here's the mechanism, and it's the part that gets skipped in almost every retelling. The flight computers take 3 sensor readings and compare them. If one disagrees with the other 2, that one is the broken one, so it gets rejected and the majority wins. Simple. Elegant. It has saved lives for decades. But that logic only works if the failures are honest. And on this airplane, the two dead sensors were frozen at almost identical values while the healthy one was doing its job and reporting a different angle. So when the numbers diverged, the computer did precisely what it was designed to do. It rejected the working sensor as faulty. It trusted the two corpses. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was functioning perfectly on poisoned data. And this is where the finger pointing usually goes wrong. The official investigation did not blame the design of that fly-by-wire system. It was built to survive one sensor failure, and it does, reliably, every day, on thousands of aircraft. What it was never built to survive was two sensors dying simultaneously and agreeing with each other. That scenario didn't come from engineering. It came from a hose on a maintenance ramp. So the airplane that everyone on board trusted to catch a stall had already, silently, lost the ability to recognize one, and not a single person in that cockpit could have known. No annunciator exists, for your protections are now decorative. Descent begins, and the crew starts running late on their test card because the flight had been reorganized and items were still outstanding, including a low-speed handling check to confirm the stall protections worked. Air traffic control in Bordeaux gets on the radio with something you rarely hear. A controller telling a crew they should not be performing flight tests under a general aviation flight plan in busy airspace. Read that as what it was. A professional saying, out loud, on tape, that this was the wrong place for this. The controller was right. That warning changed nothing. The aircraft continued toward Perpignan with the tests still on the list and the clock running down. Captain Norbert Kappel hesitated. That detail deserves far more attention than it gets, because it means the danger was sensed. During the descent, he suggested pushing the low-speed test back or dropping it entirely. He was uneasy. He said so. And then the aircraft came down through the cloud layer into clear air over the sea, and the mood shifted, and instead of canceling, he turned to Brian Horrell, the Air New Zealand captain sitting in the jump seat, and asked him how the test should be performed. Think about that for a second. The man in command was asking a passenger for the procedure to a maneuver he was about to fly, not out of incompetence. Out of a very human wish to get the job finished and hand this aircraft over clean. Then comes the number that makes aviation professionals wince. They set up for this low-speed test at roughly 3,000 feet above the water. 3,000. A maneuver designed to walk an airliner right up to the edge of a stall, performed with almost nothing underneath it. In a proper test program, that check happens high, with thousands of feet of sky in reserve, because the whole point is that something might go wrong. Down low, there is no reserve. There is no second attempt. Whatever happens, happens all the way to the surface. So the margin for error had already been spent before the throttles moved, and the airplane they were about to test was carrying two frozen probes and a computer that had rejected the truth. If this is landing hard, take a second to hit like. It genuinely pushes this in front of more people who'll care about it. 15:44:30 UTC. The test begins. Power comes back, the nose comes up, and the airspeed starts bleeding away. In a healthy A320, this is almost anticlimactic. As the wing approaches its limit, the computers step in, refuse to let the angle increase further, and the aircraft simply flies at a slow, stable speed with the protections holding the wing just shy of trouble. That's what everyone in that cockpit expected. That's what they were there to verify. But the protections were watching the frozen sensors, which were still reporting a calm 4 degrees, and by that logic, the wing was nowhere near danger. So nothing intervened. Nothing. The airplane just kept slowing and kept raising its nose, and the automatic trim system obediently wound the horizontal stabilizer further and further nose up to help. 15:45:5 UTC, 99 knots. An airliner at 99 knots is not flying, it is falling with style, and the wing let go completely. Deep stall. The airframe began shaking hard, warnings started firing, 4 chimes, and the pilots suddenly found themselves in exactly the situation the system was supposed to prevent. Now the computers dropped out of their protected mode and handed over manual control. When that happens, a message appears on the cockpit screen. USE, man, PITH, trim. 4 words. That message existed because the automatic trim had just stopped working, and someone needed to move that big tail surface by hand. Nobody saw it. Not through the shaking, not through the noise, not with the sea coming up. What do you do with a warning nobody can read? Because that stabilizer stayed where the automation had parked it, 11.2 degrees nose up, the maximum, all the way over. Hold that image, because it's the whole tragedy in one component. A slab of metal, the size of a small wing, bolted at the back of the aircraft, frozen at full nose-up command, and no longer moving on its own. Every instinct a pilot has in a stall says add power and get the nose down. power they had. The nose was no longer theirs. The airplane had been trimmed into a corner by its own automation, following its own correct logic, based on 2 probes that had been rinsed out with a fire hose 72 hours earlier on a quiet ramp in France. 1546-7 UTC. Full engine power. And that's when the geometry turned against them, because on a jet with underslung engines, thrust pushes the nose up, and with the stabilizer stuck at its nose-up limit, the aircraft did not accelerate out of trouble. It rotated. Up. Further. 57 degrees of pitch. A 150-foot airliner standing on its tail over the Mediterranean, engines screaming, wings producing nothing at all. It stalled a second time from there, and from 3,000 feet, at that altitude, there was no recovery available to any pilot alive. All 7 people on board were killed. The aircraft struck the sea off the coast near Canet-en-Roussillon, minutes from the runway it had taken off from 90 minutes earlier. So who killed Flight 888T? Not the computers. They executed their logic flawlessly. Not the design engineers, who had defended against the failure they could imagine. And not, in the way people love to imply, 2 pilots who couldn't handle an airplane. The crew was undertrained for a check flight of this kind and made choices that closed their own escape routes, and that's real. But the airplane they were sent up in had been sabotaged by good intentions and a rushed rinse job. 15 minutes of hosing without covering 3 probes. That's it. That's the whole cause sitting at the bottom of everything else, wearing the disguise of routine maintenance. And that's the detail that should follow the industry around forever. Not the freezing, not the trim, not the stall. The fact that the most dangerous moment in that airplane's life happened while it was standing still, on the ground, with nobody in the cockpit. No alarm can fire during a washdown. No checklist item catches water that hasn't frozen yet. The failure was already complete before anyone thought about flying, which means the safest airplane in the world is only ever as safe as the least supervised 20 minutes it spends in a hangar. 7 people boarded a jet that had already been broken for 3 days, and none of them, including the professionals whose entire job was to verify it, could have found the flaw with any test available to them in the air. That's why this crash still gets studied, and why maintenance check flights are treated with far more discipline now than they were in 2008. The lesson isn't complicated. It's just uncomfortable. Sophisticated automation doesn't remove human error from aviation. It moves it earlier, out of the cockpit and into the workshop, where it hides until altitude and cold weather wake it up. 2 frozen veins outvoted the truth, and the machine did as it was told. If this stayed with you, like and subscribe, because the smallest overlooked details are almost always where the real story lives.